Hi all, we're going to have a look now at Kasparov versus Ljubojevic, played in round 9 of the Tilburg 1989 tournament. They had played each other in round 2, which was a draw in about 20 moves, with Kasparov as black. So Kasparov now as white played d4, and Ljubojevic played knight f6, and after c4, e6. So he wants to play the Nimzo-Indian defence. Against this, Kasparov played a very solid move, knight f3, which avoids the main line Nimzo-Indian and invites Queen's Indians or Bogos instead. So bishop b4 check was played, and after bishop d2, black decided to exchange the dark squared bishop off. Potentially this might lead to trouble later on the dark squares and unpleasant pressure. As we'll see, white did manage to get a slight advantage from the opening, and this nagging edge was enough to win the game in fact. So we see here queen e7 and Kasparov castling, and after rook d8, Kasparov played queen c2. Black seems to have quite a solid position, but white's comfortable here. White potentially can play knight e5 and maybe get his knight to d2 say and rook c1 and pressurise this semi-open file. After knight a6, the knight seems a little bit awkward, and Kasparov continues in a natural way just to play a3 here, stopping the knight from coming to b4 and maybe expanding later with b4. Black now released the tension in the centre with this d takes c4, and after queen takes c5, we can still argue here white's got a small edge. White's more comfortable with the c-file pressure, and potentially this knight e5 could come in handy, and the semi-open c-file. So black played c5 now, and Kasparov didn't mind taking on c5, and after queen takes c5 just played knight d2, not minding even the exchange of queens. So white has a small nagging edge here, and after bishop d7 encouraged in fact black to exchange queens with this b4 move, as well as depriving the knight on a6 to come to c5. So Kasparov took that c5 square. So these knights are slightly better than black's knights, and this bishop could also be quite dangerous on this diagonal. After bishop b5, Kasparov played rook fc1. After rook ac8, now Kasparov lunges forward his f3 knight to e5, protecting the c4 knight, and also liberating this bishop now, with the threat immediately of bishop takes b7. So white's still slightly better here, and after b6, Kasparov actually played bishop b7. So it's quite annoying targeting of this knight on a6. Black played rook c7 here. And here now a very interesting move. Instead of moving the bishop back, Kasparov had in mind this idea to play a4. Now a disastrous move for black would be bishop takes c4 here, because if bishop takes a6, winning a piece, because the knight's already pressurising the c4 bishop, and black wouldn't want to play bishop takes a6, rook takes c7. So black in this position is either considering rook takes b7 or knight takes b4. He played actually knight takes b4, which temporarily wins black a whole pawn. So this is quite a dynamic continuation of Kasparov, just sacrificing a whole pawn in effect. But after a takes b5, he has this nagging pressure on the a file, and this idea of knight d6 now, which forcefully uses that nagging pressure on the a file to actually, by force, it seems, win that a7 pawn back. Because where is the rook going here? The rook must stay on the 7th rank, otherwise rook takes a7. So it can only go, in fact, to e7 here. And Kasparov played knight c8, forking the rook on e7 with the pawn on a7. So he's by force winning this pawn back. And now we see that this b6 is a liability for black, especially because white has moves like knight c4, easily targeting it. Ljubojevic played here knight bd5, and now Kasparov played knight a c6. And we see here white now also can target that b6 pawn by playing a move like rook a6. So Ljubojevic, he challenges the a file, and after knight c4, white has a big positional threat here of just rook a6. What is black doing about this? For example, let's say black does a passing move, a6, then rook a6. White would have actually a big advantage here now. What is black doing about this b6 pawn? So it seems Kasparov's temporary pawn sacrifice has intensified the pressure on black's queen side. Ljubojevic actually played knight e4, trying to get some counterplay, with ideas of, say, knight d2. So Kasparov actually played king f1, and after rook takes a1, knight c7, at least trying to get white's b pawn. Kasparov, though, he was relentless. He protected his b pawn first, and after rook d8 he now took this b6 pawn, not minding the black counterplay with rook and knight here. It's mostly harmless, because after knight c3 he just played rook a5. So he's still maintaining that b pawn, which is now a dangerous passed pawn. After rook d1 check, king g2, he plays rook b1. Now Kasparov simply played knight d7, so the pawn starts to march forward now, is able to march forward, and after f6, Kasparov played b6. Black's really in trouble now. In fact, it could be a completely lost position. After knight d5, Kasparov played knight c8, which has a very dangerous tactical idea in mind, of just knight d6 and b7, pushing the pawn even more forward. Now let's see, it's very, very difficult, in fact, for black to do anything about this pawn. Black played knight takes e2, and Kasparov played an amazing move, simply moving the pawn forward here, allowing it seemingly to be taken for nothing. But if black played rook takes b7 here, then knight d6 is crushing, because this knight is forking the b7 rook and the f7 square, stopping the king coming out. So if rook takes d7, rook a8 would be mating, like this. So the pawn moved to b7. This must have been a shock, perhaps, to Ljubojevic, or maybe he was in time trouble. He played rook g7, g1 check, but these checks are harmless, and even this seemingly very clever check, giving up a piece. Now if Kasparov had taken here, it's a perpetual, because knight takes f4. In fact, it's more than a perpetual. My analytical assistant gives mate in 2, g5 check, mating, rook takes g5, and f takes g5 would be mate. So Kasparov avoids this wisely. he after the check he plays king g4, and after h5 check, king f3, and now black has run out of checks and still faces this monstrous pawn now on b7. And in this position, Ljubojevic had had enough. He resigned. So let's have a look in overview and summary at how this pawn became so dangerous, and how white systematically increased his pressure on the queen side. We witnessed really a very clever pawn sacrifice there. So it all started with Kasparov not minding this exchange of queens and playing b4. So he had reinforced the pressure on the queen side now with this bishop b7 idea, followed by a4, temporarily sacking a pawn to fix black's pawn structure, especially the a7 pawn initially. So he gave up a whole pawn, knowing that he'd win it back tactically with this beautiful knight d6, because if rook takes d6, rook c8, and if rook e7, forking the rook on e7 with the pawn a7. So after winning the pawn back, next victim was the b6 pawn, and black was having a very hard time to defend that b6 pawn, in fact lost it. So now this b pawn had its road cleared away for liberation to the 8th rank, and Kasparov amazingly played b7 here, because of this knight d6 tactic, and black just had some checks which white cleverly just avoided and put his king in a safe haven. So what a lovely positional game by Kasparov after the very tactical game against PK with black. So that was another instructive game, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much, and see you on YouTube.